Greetings, Jellyspoons! Welcome back to another Monday Madness. I am going to be ranting, and ranting is the correct word, about the movie Hook. And I am going to do it in two parts. First, I am going to talk about the movie itself, my impressions of it as a kid, and having watched it twice in the past week. I'm going to talk about what they got wrong. That list is quite a big one. What they got right, which surprisingly is quite a few things, and what they clearly did take from the source material but sort of twisted wrongly. But for an extra dose of fun, in the second section, I am going to rewrite the movie Hook. Assuming that they just, for whatever reason, could not do the original Peter Pan story, I am going to take the sets, the cast, the costumes, the themings that they had, the ideas that they had, and I am going to attempt to turn that into a salvageable Peter Pan story. First off, as usual, I am pretending to be a professional, so if you would like to commission me on my Ko-fi page, if you would like a personalised character message for yourself or as a gift for somebody else, then you can have a personalised message from Peter Pan, all the way from the Neverland, Lucien, Mollymauk, and Kingsley. And if you would like a personalised Shakespearean soliloquy, I also do Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I also have a Patreon now. My monthly Patreon starts at about $3, I think. You get behind the scenes pics, I ask for your opinions on stuff, and just general help on what cosplays I'm planning to do. I share stuff with you before I actually post it anywhere else, and most importantly, you get photos of my dog. So apparently that's incentive. So yeah, join the Patreon if you would like to. If you'd like photos of the dog, join the Ko-fi if you would like to support me as and when you choose. And if you would like personalised in-character messages, hit up my Ko-fi commissions page. I'll put links below and all around the doobly-doo. Alright, on with the video. Comments below, let me know what you thought about the movie Hook. At the end of this video, what you thought of my thoughts on the movie Hook. And in the next video, what you think of my reworking of the movie Hook. But what I'd also like to know is, have they ever made a movie or a TV show out of a book or a piece of source material that you really loved? And if so, what was your reaction to the movie or the TV adaptation? I should get alcohol on this. The first note I wrote down, and this is the first time I'd watched Hook in like years. It opens on kids looking gormless. Huh, same face I had as a kid when I first watched this film. I'm harsh when I'm annoyed. It looks stunning. The music sounds amazing. The plot is all that lets them down, and that's what I'm going to be picking on here. One of the first things we get to learn about Mr. Banning, no, I am not going to be referring to him as Peter Pan, is that he is scared of flying. Do you get it? Because Peter Pan loves to fly. How crazy is this? I watched this movie twice this week. He's obviously scared to go on the airplane and obviously has not flown for many, many years. As is stated later, he hasn't seen Granny Wendy in 10 years. So he hasn't flown, he hasn't dared to do it, he hasn't been brave enough, and he's also been too busy at work. He's a workaholic, but that comes second. At the moment, we're focusing on the fact that he is scared of flying. Now, one of the things he says when he's trying to play it off and act cool at the office is, well, you know, when it's your time to go, it's your time to go. He obviously doesn't believe this, but the next thing he says as he steps into the elevator is, but what if it's the pilot's time to go? And this hint of fear, of the unknown, of death, of taking chances, of coming out of your comfort zone, that I like. So we're going to put a pin in that, like particularly the fear of death and the unknown. Putting a pin in that, I'm going to use that theme in my version of Hook later on. The next thing I wrote was, oh, they're flying on Pan Am. Do you get the joke? Do you get it? On the matter of things they did get right, however, they included some lines from the play which really threw me off. Every time they included original lines from the book or the play, I was just like, what are you doing? They felt jarring and weird if you knew what they were. When they get to Granny Wendy's front door, Mr. Banning is there with his kids, and after getting mad at them for just existing as kids for a while, he does end up saying to them, all look your best, first impressions are important. And this is an original line from Peter Pan. When Peter and the Lost Boys have built a house around Wendy and they knock on the door to see if she'll agree to be their mother, Peter does tell them all to look your best, first impressions are awfully important. So that weirdly jarring line is accurate, annoying as it is for me to say. Canonically, Tootles actually grew up to become a judge. So Nibs and Curly go every day to an office, Michael is an engine driver, Tootles is a judge, slightly married a lady of title and became a lord, and the bearded man who doesn't know any stories to tell his children was once John. There you go. Wendy got married, and that's about the end of her story. Also another small nitpick, Liza is the name of Granny Wendy's maid. Liza was the name of Mr. and Mrs. Darling's maids. I don't know if this is some weird callback, or if they're hinting that Liza is young and lived this long, or if they just got lazy and picked the most obvious name for Granny Wendy's maid, but yeah, that makes no sense either. Another thing that I will admit that Hook the movie got correct is Peter Pan's forgetfulness. Mr. Banning is shown forgetting the names of people he has met very recently. He forgets details, he forgets most of his past life. He forgets pretty much everything and is just a forgetful and seemingly uncaring person. And in comparison to Peter Pan, the character, he is based on, that is accurate. We have many, many examples throughout the whole original play and text of Peter Pan being forgetful to the point where he abandons Wendy and the Lost Boys on the flight to the Neverland, forgets who they are and nearly flies past and leaves them completely on their own. There are many, many instances of Peter being forgetful. I think I talk more about them in my video here. Bing! But yeah, the forgetfulness I really want to play on as well. So the uncertainty and the fear of death and Peter Pan's forgetfulness. Let's put pins in both of those and hold on to that for my version of the story later on. I'd also like to mention at this point that the story they are attempting to tell in Hook is not belonging to the right person. The story seems to be based around Mr. Banning trying to remember and reconcile his childlike past and his childhood with the adult he's become and mesh them so that he can be a better person, a more fun and loving and caring person, and he can find a balance between being juvenile and childlike and also being responsible as an adult. This should never be Peter Pan's story. This should be Wendy Darling's story, and or Mr. Darling's story. Mr. Darling has a huge arc through the play and the book, where at the beginning he is quite brash and abrupt, and things like he takes Nana out and chains her up in the yard, that kind of thing. It is shown that after he did that, he sat with his knuckles to his eyes in the back alleyway and was very sad about what he had done. So he is slowly getting that arc, and at the end of the story, when the children are on the way home, we cut to the Darlings' nursery and we learn what was happening with the Darlings all this time. Mrs. Darling was keeping her hopes up. She always left the window open, she comforted her husband, Nana, and herself, she played piano, and she always thought about her children. Mr. Darling was trying to make amends for what he had done. He had made up things with Nana, he had apologised to her and his wife, he always took the blame on himself. He said the reason the children had gone away is because of him, the reason the children were taken is because of him, because of how he behaved. And as penance, Mr. Darling started living in Nana's kennel. Now Mr. Darling does everything in this kennel. He is transported to work in this kennel. People in the streets have started to recognise him and they run alongside, seeing at him, some of them waving, some of them jeering, and he does his work at the office in this kennel, in penance, compared to how he saw himself before as this very prideful man who really cared what the neighbours thought, what other people thought of him. Now, he is just interested in paying his dues and trying to earn that respect back, not just from his wife and Nana, but from himself. So in terms of character growth, Mr. Darling's story is really fitting here, and it's very surprising they just didn't use him at all. There's also Wendy Darling, who has her own version of this story, but instead of it being a prideful adult learning to work with his sort of inner child and the children around him and be a better person, Wendy is learning how to be a grown-up. Wendy is trying to engage with this childish nature of herself, but she's also learning how responsible she wants to be. She's looking forward to the future. She does want to grow up, even if it worries her a little bit. But Wendy's character arc, or Mr. Darling's, that's what they should have focused on, not Mr. Banning. Next thing we learn about Mr. Banning is that he does not like open windows. He goes to shut the window in the nursery, and Jack, his son, also mentions later that the windows they have at home are always shut and have bars on them. This may be a sort of childish exaggeration of fact, but I'm going to choose to believe him because given the sort of tone they're going for, Peter having literal bars on the kids' windows makes sense. Twisting this a little bit, that is a theme I would like to touch on in my version of Hook later. Peter has a very guttural reaction to windows. When Wendy is telling the Lost Boys' favourite story about how the Darling children went off to the Neverland and they had a wonderful time and then they arrived home, the window was left open for them because of course their parents left the window open for them, and so up they flew to their parents, and then Peter interrupts. And Peter explains that mothers are not like that, and that mothers do not leave the window open for you, and they will forget you. And Peter explains that when he was very, very young, he stayed away for moons and moons, and then he flew home, and his mother had forgotten all about him, she had shut and barred the window, and there was another little boy sleeping in his bed. So it is technically a true story, and the idea of Peter's just instant reaction to the idea of windows and mothers and bars, I like that. So yeah, put a pin in that one as well. The second biggest nitpick I have about Hook the movie comes fairly early on. Number one, obviously, Peter Pan does not grow up. Just, that doesn't happen. It's not true. It never would. There is no but what. There is no what if. It just doesn't happen. But ignoring that, which is my biggest complaint, the second one is they are saying that the events of Peter Pan actually happened, that they were written down into a book. Granny Wendy has the book. She tells Peter, remember things, remember this really happened. Now, the biggest problem with that is that given the events of Peter Pan, Hook himself is dead. The very title of the movie is wrong. Captain Hook is long since dead, as is Tinkerbell. Your entire movie is based on two very flawed premises. Something else that vexed me as a kid and an adult watching this, particularly when I watched it back, is the use of names. I've already mentioned Liza the maid. That was the name of the Darlings' original maid. I think it was just a callback name, but I don't understand why. They also got Wendy's name wrong. Wendy's name is Wendy Moira Angela Darling. Wendy's daughter was called Jane. Why Wendy's daughter in this is called Moira, I have absolutely no idea. Maybe they thought it was a nicer name, I don't know. But canonically, yes, that is incorrect. Mrs. Banning should be named Jane. Also, Granny Wendy and Mr. Banning have some really awkward sexual tension, which number one, does not exist canonically, and number two, Granny Wendy. Her name, and they all refer to her as Granny Wendy. The mother of your wife, the grandmother to your kids, and you are sat on a bed with her this close to her face, and she is telling you shit like, I expected you to turn up at my wedding and forbid my banns. This is accurate. Wendy did canonically half expect Peter to show up at her wedding and forbid the match. Fuck you, Wendy. They continue in this vein, and it is just the most cringy, awkward thing, and I love Maggie Smith. My word, I love Maggie Smith, but this scene is so awkward. Oh. And I swear down they have Mr. Banning playing into it as well, and it's like, ooh, are they gonna kiss? Is he gonna kiss his kid's grandma? What is going on? It is awkward, it is horrendous, I don't care for it, just no. What I think they were going for is a play on the scene between Peter and Wendy, where at the beginning of the play they're exchanging thimbles and kisses, that kind of thing. Yeah, they didn't do it well. Moving on in the story to the Neverland. Now, I quite like what they did with it. I like the idea that it has grown and changed over the years. I like the bustling pirate port. So I will let them have that. That's a pass. They can keep that. Good God, this scene, what a fail. I'm not actually sure what scene this is referring to. It could be any of them. Obviously, Hook, or whoever the antagonist is, deserves a massive entrance. And I think they did give Dustin Hoffman's Hook quite a decent entrance. You see the Hook, it gets carried through the port, people are following it, they're chanting, Hook, Hook, show us the Hook, 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 Hook. And then Hook comes out and he gives a big speech. I think that was pretty cool. However, in the original play, it was much, much better. Hook and his men appear. Hook is being drawn on a chariot by his men through the forest. Let us now kill a pirate to show Hook's method. Skylights will do. Yeah, as they pass, Skylights lurches clumsily against him, ruffling his lace collar. The Hook shoots forth. There is a tearing sound and one screech. Then the body is kicked aside, and the pirates pass on. He has not even taken the cigars from his mouth. Such is the terrible man against whom Peter Pan is pitted. Yeah. I vote that version over Hook, Hook, show us the Hook, and then the boo box. Get rid of that, have him kill someone. Come on, go for it. Go ham, have Hook kill someone. Poor Skylights, sorry man. Let's do it. Rah! In my original notes, obviously Mr. Banning sort of climbing up the mast and trying to reach to touch his kids is just kind of awkward, and I hate that scene, it's really awkward. However, the idea and the plot element I would like to keep. So put a pin in that. The idea of Peter Pan failing at something and having devastating consequences. That I want to keep. The next note I have from my original set of notes when I first watched this for the first time in 10 years is, man, those mermaids are cool. I want those wigs. Hell yeah, keep those mermaids, they are awesome. The next thing we see is the Lost Boys hideout. Now, I really like how they've edited things. Again, it shows the passage of time over the Neverland. Now, canonically, the Lost Boys living up in the trees is true. After Wendy, John, Michael, and those Lost Boys all went home to London to grow up, Peter did abandon the home under the ground. He took the little house that the Lost Boys had built for Wendy. The fairies moved it high into the treetops, and he lived there instead with Tinkerbell. So, the Lost Boys and the gang living up in the trees at this point is canonically accurate. I love what they did with it as well. I love all the ropes and the ladders and the steps and how each boy has their own little den that they're in. I love that. I really enjoy that. So hella yes, we're keeping that. I guess pin in that one as well. So points for accuracy, points for coolness, and just in general, points I want to keep. I really enjoy Rufio. I love him. And in an ideal world, if we were going to tell the original story of Peter Pan and do it properly, I would have him be Peter Pan. What was his name? Dante? I think the actor's name is Dante. I would have Dante playing Peter Pan. The next note I have is for the imaginary meal that Mr. Banning and the Lost Boys eat. That is true. A lot of the meals on the Neverland were make-believe. In the book, they do talk about it a little bit. They talk about mame apples, tapa rolls, yams, that kind of thing. And that is mentioned. When they are in that scene, there is one of the kids who does mention like, oh, yum, my favorite tapa rolls or something like that. So that scene, accurate. Very, very accurate. The Lost Boys did not completely exist on make-believe meals. They did have some real food as well, and it was sort of up to Peter on what kind of meal they would have that day. But Peter didn't seem to eat human food. Peter always engaged in eating with the most gusto, but never actually seemed to eat any of his food. which is fun. But in terms of canonical truth to the original source material, yes, eating a make-believe meal is completely accurate, and I would include that in my version as well. The insults game I thought was fun. Some of the things that they were saying were just a little bit cringe, but I guess it was filmed in the 90s. I liked the idea of there being a power struggle between Peter and probably Rufio, somebody else, and the insults get too much. Alright, this note might get me hate, but I don't care. Maggie's song. I didn't mind Maggie's song. I thought it was kind of sweet. Yeah, it's a kid singing. Is she a little bit flat sometimes? Yeah, but she's a little kid singing. It's cute. My big problem with it in the movie is that we don't know that it's her mother's song until Jack says, "Mom used to sing that song." One tiny scene included earlier in the movie of the mother singing that song to or with them would have made that scene so much more powerful. So, instead, I propose, in my version, Rufio should sing that song. Another idea that I like is Hook convincing Jack to join his side and agree with him and side with him and stand with him in the fight against Mr. Banning. I like the idea of Hook convincing some of the Lost Boys to join his side, and I also don't think it would take very much. That man has a lot of fodder against Peter Pan, and Peter has done a lot of terrible things, even to the Lost Boys themselves. Some of the things Barry alluded to Peter doing to the Lost Boys, if they show any signs of growing up, Peter thins them out. We don't know what this entails. We don't know if they are banished from the Neverland, if he kills them, if he sends them away. We don't know what happens, but he thins them out. Also, every single one of them has their own tree with which to get into the home under the ground, and you need to fit your tree. If you are strangely shaped in certain places, Peter does things to you, and then you fit your tree. This does basically imply that he cuts bits off you. And considering what he did to Hook's hand, yep, I believe it. Given things like that, and the way he treats some of them, his forgetful nature, all these different things, pin in that. I don't think it would be very difficult for Hook or an antagonist of sorts to convince the Lost Boys to come over to his side. Something else I did quite like from the movie, or at least the idea that I liked, is a beaten down Peter finding the old hideout and having all these memories pop up and seeing things and items that used to belong to him and other Lost Boys and Wendy and various other people, and getting all these flashes of memory and remembering things. I really hate what they did with that piece of the plot, but I am going to put a pin in that, and I'm going to steal it and make it better. I wrote this particular note in big capital letters while I was watching that particular scene. Hook is an insult of a plot because number one, Peter does not grow up, and number two, he does not want to be a real father. Yeah, Peter Pan's happy thought in comparison to Mr. Banning's happy thought is not being a real father. Peter does play pretend as the father of the Lost Boys with Wendy, but he goes to great lengths to re-establish and reaffirm with Wendy that it's only make-believe, though. It's only pretend. It would make me seem so old to be a real father. No, it is pretend. And then Wendy gets really upset and annoyed at him, and she agrees and says, well, yes, of course, if you wish, if that's what you wish. And then she says, well, what are your feelings to me, Peter? What are your exact feelings to me? And he replies instantly and just says, those of a devoted son. So although he is playing at father, he is still of the mentality that she is playing mother and he is only playing. Awkward Tinkerbell subplot about wanting to kiss him. Ew, no. Yeah, no. Tinkerbell's plot through this entire movie is dumb, and it's as if there were 17 writers who did not speak to each other between writing scenes. The final fight was fun. It was very childlike with the Lost Boys sort of firing like food and stuff at the pirates. It was all fun. It was more dangerous canonically though. Like people did die. I think it was Slightly who kept a tally of how many pirates and people died. Yeah, and there was at least 17, and there was 15 fatalities by the end of the final battle in the canonical story. Most of those were pirates. Basically, yeah, people did actually die. It was more dangerous than just food fight, everybody, but it was fun. I didn't mind that. I enjoyed it. It was quite good. However, Rufio should not die, and in my version, Rufio will either die a better death or not die at all, because yeah, Rufio deserved better. Hashtag justice for Rufio. Rufio deserved better. Oh good, we're back in London. Now this scene is just a play-by-play of Wendy, John and Michael coming home and going to bed. That's true as well, actually. So technically the scene where Moira, Jane, is sitting and she says to Granny Wendy, I have seen them so often in my dreams that now I see them when I'm awake, kind of thing. That is fairly accurate. Mrs. Darling did see that. When the children came in, they heard Mrs. Darling playing the piano and they saw that she looked sad and they decided not to run in and startle her. They wanted to break it to her gently that they were back. So they all got into bed. Mrs. Darling came back through and she didn't think it was real. It was really sad and heartbreaking. She didn't think that they were really there. She saw them so often in her dreams that she didn't believe they were real until they called to her. Side note, this is actually quite a terrifying story when you think about it like as a parent. you know, your kids being taken away and you have no control over that, and you're just hoping and wishing that they come back, and you dream about them being there, and then one day they are and you're not quite sure if it's real and what's not. Man, you can really go insane. If they wanted to do a different take on Peter Pan, that's the take they should have done. If they wanted to talk about grown-ups so badly, which they clearly did when they had a grown-up Peter Pan, why didn't they just tell the story from the Darlings' point of view and then cut ever so often to the Neverland with these sets? You know, you could have had it be different kids. If you wanted to have Maggie and Jack instead of Wendy, John and Michael, fair enough. Show some kids later down the line. Do it in Margaret's timeline, you know? Have Margaret and the kids going off to the Neverland and show Jane and the parents being really gutted. Show that side if you want to do that. Hell, you could have made this movie so much more interesting. This is a steaming pile of garbage. I was getting so salty by this point. And then, at the end when Mr. Banning wakes up and he's in Kensington Gardens, I just put, oh, he's by the Peter Pan statue. Okay, that's good. Just remind us of the real proper Peter. Man, I'm salty. And then quite a big question mark. So Tink is sad or mad again? What? And then she's like, oh, that place between sleep and awake, that's where I'll always love you. Man, way to make things awkward, Tinkerbell. He's literally going home to his wife, you weirdo. So I'll just read you my last sentence. Okay, I quote the last thing that Mr. Banning says, which is, to live will be an awfully big adventure. And I put, yes, to live eternally as a boy, Peter Pan, the eternal boy. Right, I'm off to watch Kathy Rigby goodbye. And I did. I went and watched the Kathy Rigby Peter Pan immediately after watching her. I needed to cleanse my palate. To recap, what have we discovered? Some parts of the movie Hook were fairly canonically accurate. They either represented real things and characters and events that happened in the original story. They had quotes and things from the original story. They had things that would canonically seem to have carried over, like the way the Lost Boys are now living in the trees and there are new Lost Boys. They didn't have the same names. I didn't have to look these up because at no point do they seem to refer to each other by name. Like, there's a Lost Boy called Pockets. I was like, which one is Pockets? Like, apparently the little one. And then there's one called, like, Don't Ask. And of course, he's the, like, greaser one who looks like he should be in Bugsy Malone. Like, the costume designs of all these Lost Boys is fairly cool. I'll give you that. But yeah, some of the things are fairly accurate. They have clearly paid attention to the source material, which in a way makes it worse, because the movie they gave us was utter trash. And yeah. However, what do I like? Well, I like the sets, I like the costumes, I like most of the cast, I like Maggie's song, I love the music, my god! So, keeping all of that, I am going to attempt now to take some of the themes and the key moments and scenes from this Hook movie, and I am going to rewrite it into a Peter Pan movie that I think would be better than the movie that we got. So come and join me in part 2, where I will be rewriting the movie Hook based on a lot of the themes, key scenes and moments from what they gave us, using the canonical play and the text in the book to make it into a more fun and vaguely accurate movie representation of the character Peter Pan. Alright, see you in part 2. What year did this shit even